Welcome to Mysterious Goings On. I'm Alex Greenwood. You know, I get the privilege of talking to writers from literally all over the globe. And today is no exception because we're going to welcome Andrew Shanahan here. Andrew has been a journalist for over 2 decades, writing for some of the biggest newspapers in the world. He's based in Britain, and he's founded an organization in 2014 called Man v Fat, which has since helped over 4 million men around the world to lose weight and get healthy. When he stepped back from Man v Fat, he returned to his first love, writing. He published his first novel, Before and After, in January 2020. It's the story of a man who is trapped inside his home as a pandemic rages outside. And it's accidentally a very 2020 kind of topic, right? But he promises this doesn't mean he has the gift of foresight. Well, we're going to find out all about this novel, and we're going to talk to Andrew Shanahan, who likes to be called Shan, I believe. And we're going to just talk about writing, and we're going to kind of kick some stuff around here. So welcome, Shan, to Mysterious Goings On.
Alex, thanks ever so much for talking to me.
It's my pleasure. So let me ask you first. Now, you've written, have you written for The Guardian, I believe?
Yeah, so I've been a journalist for over 20 years, and I started with The Guardian newspaper and went on to write for The Times, Daily Mail, Telegraph. So a lot of the big UK papers, really.
Okay. So, you probably know how to write.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? Although I'd say that just because I've written for the newspapers doesn't necessarily follow that I know how to write. I think if what it would indicate that I've learned is how to write to a deadline and how to turn in content that is an acceptable quality for an editor. I wouldn't say it necessarily means that I know how to write.
Well, I would, after reading through Before and After, I think you do know how to write and write extremely well. I want to ask you about Before and After. Do you mind just kind of giving us the blurb, the back of the book jacket cover? What's this book about?
So it's about a guy called Ben Stone who weighs 601 pounds, and he's what they call a shut-in, which is someone who doesn't leave their house. In Ben's case, it's because he can't physically. He's too big, literally, to leave the house. And also mentally, he's just not capable of, contemplating that. And it starts off, the book begins where he's having to be removed from his flat because he needs his leg amputating because he has diabetes. And so the council have come along and taken the front wall of his flat off. He lives on the 4th floor of a block of flats. And they're lowering him to the floor by crane. And it's as he's wrapped up and ready to go and sort of just about to be lifted up by the crane that the world ends. And so the book is really, that is the very start of the book. And the rest of the book is really about him, how he got to that point. So, I mean, the book takes 2 views of his life. So it's very much before, as in why did he reach the weight that he's reached? What happened to him? What caused him to be in this situation? And the after is very much about what happens. It's a sort of a real time, you see what happens to him, both physically, mentally, and spiritually probably as well.
I see that we're treated to his inner monologue a bit through the book.
Sure. Really, yeah. And I think that for me, that was one of the really important things is that I think, I don't know about yourself, sort of the things that you like to read personally, but that for me, I still see that there's a real homogeneity around heroes and characters and main characters in that they tend to just, I think it's getting better gradually in that we're starting to hear voices from different communities, from different perspectives. And for me, that is just fundamental. It's so important to be able to find yourself in fiction and to see people who look like you, who sound like you. And I don't think that matters, whether it's from a race, gender, sexuality, physical perspective. But for me, it was really important that we actually just had it wasn't just a cosmetic decision that Ben weighs so much. So 601 pounds is kind of 240-ish kilograms, or around about sort of 50, 60 stone, depending on where people are listening to this. And, you know, I didn't want that just to be a cosmetic decision. Oh, he's a big guy, and then the story unravels. It's about, you know, his weight. It's about the story of his weight, why he reached that weight, because I think it's a fascinating topic.
Well, it's literally right in front of us all.
Yeah.
Especially in the developed world, we are not what you would call live thin specimens to mostly. I have to ask you this, and forgive me if it's a really silly question, but is he Ben Stone because Stone is 14 pounds, or is that just completely a coincidence?
Do you know what? There's two reasons why he's named the way he is. One is that I don't know if you'll have seen the film, but have you ever seen Doc Hollywood with Michael J. Fox?
Yes, I love that movie.
I love that movie. Yeah, exactly. It's I really, really do adore that movie. It's and so the character, Michael J. Fox's character in that film, is Ben Stone, and also the two sort of main characters in the book are Ben, who is obviously the main character, and Brown, his dog. And Ben Brown happens to be the name of my cardiologist. So there you go. But yes, there is a nice sort of angle in the fact that Stone, I suppose there is an unwitting pun there as well.
Well, we all do it. Well, I blended. So many people I know read my stuff and they're like, "Oh my gosh, is that my last name on there?" I'm like, "Yes." "Oh, I'm so overjoyed. I'm so honored." I'm like, "Well, calm down. It's the villain."
Yeah, exactly. They die.
But Doc Hollywood, that's one of those films that if I'm flipping through and it's on, I will watch it. Particularly because I love Julie Warner, the love interest in there. But anyway,
yeah. I mean, she's absolutely, and
she's a delight.
Yeah, and it's such it was a real surprise for me watching that film. I think when I was growing up, because he was, you know, the king of. I just, when I was younger, I assumed that he was in all films. I thought that's what films were. It was Michael J. Fox in every film. I was, it has to be said, a spectacularly stupid child. I don't think I've got that much smarter, but the thing for me was that he'd done all of these blockbuster, you know, like Back to the Future, Secret of My Success, things like that, and then Doc Hollywood came along, and it was such a small film, and I think he's referenced the fact that it was, you know, it was very much supposed to be like a Frank Capra style film, and I'd never really seen any of those films before, but for me it was really fascinating because, although we lived in the UK, I kind of really understood a little bit more that, oh, wow, so you can actually make a film about somewhere as boring as where I live and still have, you know, the context of a story there. And I suppose that, in a funny way, that goes back to representation. It was that sort of surprise of representation that, you know, where I lived was just a small rural village in the middle of England, you know, entirely anonymous, and, you know, I never thought there was any kind of romance or story to it. But I think in some ways that maybe did open my eyes a little bit to the fact that, oh, you know, a story, even a Michael J. Fox film, can be about something as innocuous as where I live.
You know, the fish out of water too, that it's a bit of a trope, but they did this so extraordinarily well. This happened in my own life where I moved from not a huge city, but a city of about 1 million people to a town of about 1,500 for a job. And I was kind of I had that same vibe. So I think I fell in love with that too. But to your point, Shan, it taught me that, I mean, there is interest and there is drama and there is it's everywhere there are humans. And it's great that, you know, you're modeling that not only with location, but of course with people who are overweight, with this character. And I do the same thing. I have a character in my series who has some severe anxiety issues and some mental illness, not like he's criminal or anything, but he has challenges. And I've had people tell me, wow, the hero of your books has some of the problems I have. And you do it in a way that doesn't mock it, which is the other thing we're talking about here with Ben Stone. You're Ben Stone.
Yeah, and I think it's so easy. You know, I mean, it goes back to that age-old writer's advice, doesn't it? Write about what you know, and write, you know, just so that it has that tangibility, it has that reality to it. And because people can reflect on that and they can see it, and so lots of people have read it who obviously aren't as heavy as Ben, or perhaps don't have weight issues at all. But they've said, do you know what? It actually made me understand a little bit more about how someone could get to that size, and how, what the psychological impact of that might be. Because I think, especially with weight, as you say, so in the UK, and I think it's the same over in the States, it's 7 out of 10 men are either overweight or obese. Yeah. So it always used to make me laugh when people would say, oh, you're sort of, man v fat's quite a niche. I was thinking, well, a niche is the sort of, is the narrow part. Actually, what I'm on the mass market, if you'll pardon the pun. There are 70% of a market is not a niche. It's the whole, pretty much. So I think for we need that representation, and we need to understand those perspectives. And I think that it's great in fiction when we can do that, because we can explore what it's like to be that person without and gain greater empathy, without it costing us anything, really.
Do you mind if we step back for a moment, because this is part and parcel to your book? So Man v Fat. Could you just give us a little background on how that happened for you? I'm very curious, and I think the listeners will want to know this in relation especially to before and after.
Sure. So Man v Fat started in 2014. And it was born out of the fact that throughout my life, I've struggled with my weight. I sort of fluctuate wildly from, I think, the heaviest I've been is probably about 50 pounds heavier than where I am now. And I've probably been about 50 or 60 pounds lighter than where I am now as well. So throughout my life, I've just had this constant oscillation with regards to my weight. And it's my problem, if you like, is largely because I tend to eat quite compulsively, or eat not because I'm hungry. So I don't think it's as problematic as some people have it. Some people have horrific just compulsive eating issues, and I don't think mine's at that point. But I've certainly been through periods of my life where I'm doing a lot of eating not because I'm hungry, and often that's because of stress. It's because of I'm eating out or eating through problems. And so in about 2013, I think I was about the heaviest I've been. And I had just sold my previous business, and which was a wedding website. It's a website for men who are getting married. So we used to write a lot of speeches for guys and that sort of thing. And I'd sold that business, and I was just desperately unhappy with where I was. And so I was really, really trying hard to lose weight. And I struggled a lot because all of the support, the products, the information out there were aimed at women. And, looking at it, I just felt it was so strange that this topic was, it was clearly a problem. You could just walk down the high street and see that there were just as many men as women who were overweight. And yet everything was focused on women. And clearly, from a gender perspective, that's just so damaging, because women then start to interpret that as, right, fat is a female issue. If you are a fat woman, that is a bad thing. Whereas if you're a fat man, well, where are the groups to help men? So clearly it's not an issue to be a fat man. And I just, I felt like I needed support. So I was the one fat bloke at Weight Watchers and Slimming World and all of those groups. And I remember vividly the point where I just thought, this is so absurd that there's no support for me, is that they were talking in one of the groups, and the leader was saying, she said, okay, so we're going to look at, periods and how periods affect your weight. And, if it's your time of the month, then clearly that's going to cause fluctuation in your weight. And I was thinking, yeah, that's not my problem. And just from that point, I thought that there needs to be something. And equally, a lot of the things that they were talking about just didn't seem relevant to me. Like they weren't talking about, working. So I was working very long hours, and I couldn't think, there was practicalities around that. So I was working through lunch, and then by the time I got home, I was starving. So I was just looking for something very, very quick to fill me up. So And also I was stressed. So I was speed relaxing with beer and crisps and, just getting to the end of the day and going, yeah, that's me done. I'll have a beer. And those were the things that were causing me problem. And I thought there might well be a gender issue there. So I started a crowdfunding campaign to see if other men out there were interested in male-focused support for weight loss. And I think about 3,000 men joined up during the crowdfunding campaign. It was supported by people like Jamie Oliver and, some big names who clearly thought that, that this was, and it rolled on from there, really. Man v Fat's been a real eye-opener. I've learned a lot. I'm not sure I've necessarily learned to control my own weight, but I've certainly learned that I'm not alone in terms of struggling with those things. And I also know now that because of Man v Fat, there are things that men can turn to. So we started a lot of groups. We run a scheme in the UK and Australia. I think we're launching in America quite soon, called Man v Fat Football, which are football leagues, so soccer leagues exclusively for overweight and obese men. But the sort of twist on them is that all the guys weigh in before they play. And if they've lost weight from week to week, then they score bonus goals for their team. So you can be a productive member of your team, even if you don't feel like you can get up and run around. You can lose weight and still score goals.
That's fantastic.
Thanks.
I love that. I love that. Can I ask you the word fat?
Ooh.
You obviously have no issue using that word. Now, maybe this is a British American thing here, but here that word is almost taboo. Are you familiar with that? Or do you?
Yeah, I mean, we had some meetings. So we work with quite a lot of big funders now. So the UK government have started funding us, and we work with an organisation called Sport England. We work with a lot of groups, public health groups, who are traditionally very squeamish around anything that might cause offence. And the conclusion was that actually, even if the funders themselves and the organisations took offence, the individual people didn't see it as a taboo word. They understood that whether or not it was a very male approach, in the sense that they just they didn't want to pussyfoot around it and say, I'm being, it's almost like just going back the other way. Like you can tiptoe around it sensitively, use as many euphemisms as you like. But actually, sometimes you just want to go, do you know what? No, I'm just fat. That is, the fat is my issue. And if I say that out loud, it sort of dispels some of the shibboleths and the sort of the nonsense around that, and says, actually, no, do you know what? I need to lose some weight. That is my issue. It's not about, anything else. I just need to lose some weight.
Yeah. And I think that what I think people on my side of the pond need to understand about this too is, it's like you said, fat is a very apt descriptor. You can say I wear fluffy sizes, or even overweight, whatever, but let's get down to it. If you're overweight, and by the way, I'm doing all right now, but I've had my ups and downs too. Nothing, to the point where I needed a group, but certainly a point in my life where I had to start exercising or else, So, I think we all get there. I'm in my 50s now, but in my 40s, it was just like 40. Two things happened. Well, three things. Had a kid. I didn't. My wife did. Had a kid. My eyesight started to go finally, and I just gained weight by looking at food. So anyway, I learned to start with. But I think the distinction, though, here that people need to get across is the concept of fat shaming. Is one. So let me give you an example. Some people I saw on Twitter the other day, toxic Twitter. Someone made a comment about the president and said he was a fat blankety blank, and somebody got on there and said, I agree, he's a total jerk, but why do you have to fat shame him in the process?
Sure.
And so what is your thoughts on that? And just lay it out for me, if you just think that's right, wrong, or silly, or what do you think of that? Though
I don't think it's silly at all. And I think that, absolutely, body shaming for any reason whatsoever is, it's not just wrong, it's counterproductive. People sometimes feel like they can fat shame someone into, oh, come on man, you're super overweight, you look awful, and that they don't understand that doesn't lead to someone going, do you know what, they're right, I'm gonna do something positive. Actually, all it does is it just drags you deeper and lower, and leaves you feeling that, so it's counterproductive. But ultimately, fat is a biological term. It's not something that we need to skirt around. If you speak to a biologist, they will tell you that, underneath your skin, there is a fat layer, a layer of fat. So there is a technical term there that is not a euphemism in and of itself. And I think that part of it is, I think you could draw analogies with the sort of the approach to the word queer, and about how people have reclaimed that word, and the people within that group have reclaimed the word queer and said, actually, no, I identify in this way, and it speaks of something to my identity. Now, I think that it's different because clearly we're talking about fat as being something non-ideal, and that's not true of people who are using the word queer. But I think that you can say to people, if you had to describe yourself, what would you think is the most accurate term? And I think for the men who are engaged with Man v Fat, I think that if you say, and the name itself obviously puts it in a very pragmatic system. It is me versus my problem. It is me versus fat. And the second you start sort of distancing yourself from your problem through using euphemisms and saying it's me versus, fluffy sizes, I think was the one you used. Yeah. It weakens the battle. It weakens the journey and the target and the purpose of what you're doing. If you can state your target and your mission in as simple a terminology as possible, then I think that's very powerful. And especially if I'm doing it for myself. So, you would have to speak to some of the guys on the scheme, but I think since we launched, I don't think we've ever had anyone say from within the scheme, this is offensive, I wish it was called something else. And I think that's because they all identify as fat and all identify that what they want is to create this Man v Fat situation for themselves.
Exactly. And I think it's incumbent upon writers, whether you're a fiction writer, journalist, or nonfiction, whatever you're writing, it's incumbent upon us, I think, particularly in a sadly post-fact world, to perhaps not dilly-dally around with the language too much, because I think we're seeing so many examples where people are not saying what they mean, and obviously not meaning what they say. And so I pardon my, if you will, pardon my cul-de-sac there, but I had to ask you about that because
I agree. I think it's a fascinating topic, and I think that you're right. It's something that's fundamental to the process of writing, and it's something that I've thought about deeply, not only from the Man v Fat point of view, but also, I mean, as someone English, of course I worry about offense at every single step of the turn. I wake up sweating at night wondering if I said sorry to people enough today, and if not, I break out into the streets and apologize randomly.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry. Oh gosh, I am sorry. So sorry. And I am a compulsive apologizer, but you're absolutely right. I think where writers, it is incumbent on us to be brave is in our use of language and in our quest of, of course we have to be sensitive to, are we being offensive? But equally, we have to be brave in at least asking those questions. So a situation arose recently where the next book that I'm writing on, a character has cerebral palsy. And I was speaking to some of the organisations in the UK, Scope in particular, who are very, very good, and they sort of represent cerebral palsy, people with cerebral palsy and children with cerebral palsy. And I sort of really had to wrestle with this. Am I in some way, being a tourist in this world? And is that the right thing to do? Similar to the situation with yourself and the mental health aspects that character has, you have to make sure that there's a reason for why you're doing that. But then I also think you have to be brave as well and say, no, I am going to use that character, and I am going to say something valid, even if I don't have cerebral palsy myself. I think it's still a reasonable thing. We are engaged in fiction. We are allowed to imagine.
There's so many branches to that tree, which I wish we could get into, but it also gets to me. There's a branch that goes to where actors are now being criticized if they're playing a role that they don't actually inhabit in real life.
Mm,
I can see some of the points there, but a lot of the points I think when, we're talking about art here, we're talking about a different direction, but I know
mm.
we don't have time for that. So I do want to get back to before and after, before you say, Alex, we're at after and this interview is over, I'm leaving. Um, let's get back to that book then. How long did I want to ask the nuts and bolts questions that I ask all writers. Well, how long did it take you to write the book from conception to published?
So I think, as I said, one of the things that journalism taught me was to be fairly proficient at writing as a profession, having deadlines and that sort of thing. And so I think I started in July of 2019, and I think the third draft was finished in October. So it's about 80,000 words. So I think the first one took probably month and a half to write, and then myself, my wife, and my two boys read it, and between us we came up with the fact that I'd just got the last third of the book completely wrong, and so it was quite it wasn't necessarily an easy fix, but it was really apparent that it was an interesting book. It's just that what I'd done was I tried to, it sort of felt like I'd grafted on an action film at the end, and it went slightly absurd. And I think what's really useful about that stage of where you come on back to a first draft is the flaws in it are so magnified, and instantly you can say, good grief, what on earth was I thinking? And that's great fun, because you can then go, fab, one of the joys of writing is deleting.
Absolutely, it is. I love the first draft, and I put it away for a few weeks. I don't know if you do this, but I have to put it in the drawer for a couple of weeks and come back to it with fresh eyes. And I cringe half of it, and then I enjoy part of it. And every now and then I'll circle something and put an exclamation point by it. It's the only time I print anything out, by the way, is that usually after that first draft and when I go over it. The rest of the time my editor handles it for me, but I do love that part of the process as well.
And isn't that a satisfaction thing as well, of like having the printout of the book?
Yeah.
Of just sort of tangibly existing in the real world, and you being able to slam it on a desk and go, yes, it's there. There is something.
It's substantial, it's it's like funny. I'm doing this. Nobody can see it, the listeners, but I'm holding up a laptop. I can't slap this laptop on the desk more than once or twice.
And it doesn't make it any kind of, it doesn't make you feel good whatsoever if you just look at a file size of a document and go, whoa, 430K. Look at that.
Look at those zeros and ones piling up there. That's great. Okay, so you did you publish this independently, or did you shop it, or how did that go?
So I have an agent. I've published before. So I've published 3 books of nonfiction before, one connected with Man Be Fat and a couple of others. And I've done some ghostwriting in the past and that sort of thing. And so I'd worked with publishers quite a lot before. And I knew that if I ever got the opportunity, I would like to do something without publishers. As much as I love publishers, and I think that they do a great job, I think that my experience has been that in a post bookshop world, and I don't want anyone to scream when I say post bookshop world, it's just a fact of sales that so many more books are sold online as ebooks these days, and as print on demand, or however they're delivered via Amazon, that it's a reality that fiction writers have to adapt to and ideally go with. So I kind of, the whole thing with publishers to me seemed to be that they had it locked up in terms of getting books into bookshops.
Yeah.
And, and printing at volume, and distributing those books. And now it sort of seems, although I love the physical product of a book, it seems a little bit absurd. And I know that people are fetishizing them as objects now, and there are blogs devoted to how beautiful books are, and I can get that, and I agree, but equally I know that that's not where the business model is. Certainly for me, certainly for, for bookshops, basically. I mean, I'm sure people will point me towards fantastically profitable bookshops, but I know that that's not the truth for a lot of them. And so I wanted to do this independently, and I was also really looking forward to having full editorial control, because I'm a total control freak. And I worked with an editor because I'm not insane. I'm not
Yeah.
something that hasn't been edited. So I worked with an editor who sort of hates me, which I think is a really healthy relationship to have, because I think it's always a little bit dangerous when you're working with an editor who's a little bit enthralled to you and thinks that you're great. I think you have to have someone who, and the editor for this book is someone I know and have known for a long time, and I would say that she's a friend, but I don't think she thinks I'm much cop as a writer. And that's fine.
Yeah.
That works well.
I have the same thing. My editor, he's a professional editor, but I've known him since high school. He is not afraid to tell me this is crap, and I'll say what part, and he'll say all of it.
Yeah.
The words
between the two covers.
Yeah, it's an old. Is that an old Blackadder line? There's something needs work here. What would that be? The words. So I think. Well, so you put this out in January before there actually was full world knowledge of this pandemic.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting and amusing in a black way that this thing is about this. So how would you, and forgive me if you don't want to do this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway, because I'm a former journalist. How would you classify the book? Is it science fiction? Is it horror? Is it humor?
Yeah,
what is it?
All of the above. I think the issue is that there are elements. I think more and more I've come to think of it a little bit as sort of body horror, just this sort of area of horror. And do you know what? It's not something that I would necessarily think to write, because I'm incredibly squeamish, and especially with reading horror books, I would run a mile. It would terrify me, but equally, I think that it is broadly within the post-apocalyptic fiction category. It is a science fiction book in the sense that, I suppose, or speculative fiction in that it's positing a "what if this happened" type question. And I think there was a really good review from an organisation called the British Obesity Society, who read it, and it was quite a surprise, but they gave it an absolutely glowing review, because they said, I can't remember the exact quote, but they said that this is a horror story, and the worst part of it is that so much of it is true. And I thought that was a really insightful comment, because they're absolutely right. It is, the horror of the book, certainly half of the book, is about Ben and his, how he has lost control of his body, and how he has lost the ability to connect with his body and to have a good relationship with his body. And I think that has been a really interesting thing to write, because it's not something I've necessarily seen before. It's about a man who is, hugely overweight, and who struggles with that. And I think some of the bits that when I was writing them, I really thought, were very emotional and difficult to write, let alone read, were the moments where people were just so callous about his weight. Yeah. And I know that, I've obviously, through running Man v Fat, I've interviewed probably thousands of men who are overweight, and some of whom have done an incredible job of losing weight, and some of whom are still struggling with their weight. So, I feel like I have a really good insight into that psychology. And so there's a point in the book where Ben is just in a supermarket picking something up for his mum, and a woman comes over and starts telling him how he can lose weight and what he needs to be buying to lose weight. And he was buying something for his mum. And I feel like that sort of that public ownership of overweight bodies, they are something that people are allowed to comment on, or that it is in the public domain. is really chilling, because we all should have that right to privacy and if we want to anonymity. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's what drives Ben to being a shut-in, is that the only way he can guarantee that privacy is through not going out. And for me, I feel desperately empathetic and sad for people in that situation, because I just am aware of that desperate want for privacy and that desperate want for just to be able to live your life without other people having an opinion on you and your size.
Well, to be judged by
Sure,
people,
exactly.
it's huge, and that's being judged is at the root of a lot of anxiety disorders, by the way.
Yeah.
People get anxiety because they fear they're being judged, or if I turn in this assignment at work, I can't turn it in because I fear I'll be judged negatively for it. You see, there's a connector, I think, there between the world you're writing about and the world I write about, with the judgment. I know we've got just a few moments left here, and I've so enjoyed this, Shan. You are just a delight to speak with about all of these things.
Yes, I am.
You really are. I'll take that $5 later, but seriously, no. If I could, I'd love it if you could just maybe give a word to our writer listeners out there who are working on their first book. This sounds like this has been a tremendously rewarding experience for you, and you're writing another one. Any words of buck up for people out there trying to get through it, especially in November, the National Novel Writing Month?
Yes, exactly. Well, I will also point out that it's No Nut November as well. So I don't know if that psychologically there's a connection between those two things. I'll allow you to explain that concept. I would say, so there's two pieces of advice that I would pass on, and this is done on the proviso that people don't assume that this means that I've cracked it in any way, shape, or form, because I fantastically have not. The strong advice I always return to is don't get it right, get it written. And that, I think, is a very neatly encapsulated piece of advice about, you referenced your first draft, and the way you referenced it made me think that you don't actually struggle to do first drafts. Is that fair?
I'm on my 8th book, and that first draft for that first book took me 2 years. But my second, third, fourth books, they came really fast, and then the fifth, and then lately it's like pulling teeth. So I don't know. I'm not typical in any way, I don't think.
You've experienced different sides of it, because I think, like I say, I can approach things in quite a professional way of saying, look, you've just got to get 80,000 words done. You've got this length of time to do it. Get on with it.
Yeah.
And so I hear that voice in my head and I do it. So I think there was Frank Cottrell Boyce was writing the other day on Twitter, and he was saying, who did Billions, and I'm going to forget all the rest of his books, but anyway, he had a great phrase, which was slap it down. That first draft, slap it down. Don't preempt yourself. Don't double think.
Yeah.
Don't, because as you are writing and thinking this is pretty good, there is another part of your brain going, this is ineffable shit.
Absolutely.
And the perhaps the one skill that a writer has is being able to have a brain that has both of those voices at top volume in their head and not explode. I think that's probably, as long as you understand that every other writer is like that, I think that is a really healthy thing to do. You will have one voice in your head going, hey, it might even be tiny, saying, this is all right. This is, you're putting one word next to the other. Well done. And then you will have like just giant voices in your head going, yes, but what's the point? I mean, come on, you utter turd. This is stupid, and all of those things are, that is, I'm sure this is why so many writers listen to music as they write. It's just to try and drown out those voices and just, so anyway, slap it down, get it done. Because actually, as you say, as you go back and review, you go, oh yeah, both of those guys are right, actually. Some of this is really good and some of it's awful, but actually I can see which bits are awful. And maybe I can give the guy who writes the good stuff an opportunity to fill in those bits now. So that's get it written. Don't get it right, get it written. And the other thing I would say is just do it. You know, it's so. I think people get so caught up about sales, and you know, I mean, if we're indie authors, surely, I mean, we have to acknowledge the fact that this is a phenomenally unlikely thing to result in money. I mean, yes, of course, that should still be a credible target for you, but equally, don't write for that purpose. Write because you want to express something. Write because you can't quite find the story that you want to read. You know, write because it makes you happy. And sometimes when you're listening to that tiny voice saying this is okay, that makes you feel good. You know, any of those reasons, and just for expression, you know, just because you can't find a book with the character who you want to see, that is a good reason to write. And just get it done, get it out there. And I think that is a really healthy approach to, and don't worry about reviews and all, any of those perspectives. Just worry about you expressing yourself. I think that is a really, truly beautiful thing to do.
Where were you 10 or 11 years ago when I was writing my first book, Shan? I mean, you know what? Back to judgment. I was so afraid of being judged about
Yeah.
my books. And even now, it's like sometimes somebody says, "Oh, I want to read your book." And I've had to work on this. And sometimes you talk about apologizing. I'd be like, "Sorry in advance for how crappy this book is going to be. Here you are. Feel free to use it if you run out of toilet paper in the pandemic." What the hell am I doing? But I have a friend, a very dear friend who listens to this show, and I'm going to paraphrase this. She's a great reader. She can write as well, but she's a great reader and a great booster of authors.
Mm,
In fact, she often retweets guests on this show. Thank you so much. She
thank you.
told me, she said, she said, authors who downmouth their own work, particularly in public, are unintentionally insulting the readers who do like their work.
Yeah, damn it, that's true. Yeah.
Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah.
That's what I needed to hear for years because my own insecurity. And I've had some nice mentions, some awards, things like that. I have not sold millions of copies, but then when like you bring out a book like I have in a series, and then it just all you hear after you publish it is boom, fall. You know, it just falls apart. Nothing happens. Hardly anybody buys it, and you're like, why did I do it? Well, what I'm going to do after I release this next one, I'm going to go back to this interview.
Yeah.
And I'm going to listen to what you just said about all that stuff, because you're exactly right. You really are.
But I mean, you know, this is what hence my caveat at the beginning of that, because I'm still, so I'm probably 25, 30-ish thousand words into this new book. And I have been in this situation, you know, so surely I should be able to process my own advice. I should be going, stop thinking, just write. But equally, I'm, you know, utterly, I mean, obviously I've got the bloody pandemic to be able to blame this all on and go, oh, well, you know, we're all on furlough and it's difficult to actually find the time. But that's just this nonsense, really. I could be writing 2,000-3,000 words a day easily, and I'm not.
Well, I'm not either. And that was one of my last wrap-up questions. You've already, I've had a tremendously difficult time simply because, and for a while there, I kicked myself and said, you're making excuses, and perhaps I am, but I have lost the focus.
Yeah.
I just find of course, I've had two big competing things. One, the pandemic, and hoping everybody stays safe around me and all that. The other being the U.S. elections, which have preyed on me. So I have just felt I've had so little energy. And I also, and this is funny because I've had writer friends who say, well, you should go write as an escape. And I feel like that's an indulgence, I guess, which is wrong. I think that's totally wrong. I'm wrong. I think I should have been writing, and I will.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, I hear all of that, you know, including the US election. And even though, you know, I'm a Brit, it's sort of sucked us all in. And I think you said toxic Twitter earlier, and you're absolutely right. I've come off and deactivated my Twitter account like 9 times this month because I just feel myself being pulled into that vortex of hate and self-loathing, and think, oh yeah, but it's good for scrolling. And I think instantly, I think doom scrolling might be the word of 2020.
Yeah.
But I agree. It's about focus, but I think it's also about the psychic energy that we all have, I mean, regardless of whether you believe in psychic ability or anything, but the energy of the psyche, the brain power that you have at your command. And so much of that, I think we have frittered on social media, US elections, pandemic. And so maybe we should be kinder to ourselves and say, okay, well, let's say this vaccine. And, I thought it was hilarious, the fact that the vaccine and Trump's defeat came within a few days of each other, because you're sort of thinking, maybe this is sort of the start of a healing process. Apologies if your politics lie in a different direction, but it's just that sense of, at least there is, a resolution. Because I think regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat, I don't think many Republicans enjoyed the process of a Trump presidency, because it was just so caustic. And I think, just the idea of a boring 4 years under Biden is just, and sounds glorious, doesn't it?
Well, I've said repeatedly on Twitter, I said, I just fantasize about a day when I don't have to worry about what the latest thing is going to come out of the White House. I just want competence. I just want somebody to handle that, because I would like to, as Voltaire said, I would like to tend to my own garden. I would like to make things well in my area and not worry about, is Washington, D.C. going to explode because of some ridiculousness? So there's that. And I'm probably more effective at protecting my family and myself from COVID if I'm thinking, okay, the people at the top are also working to that same goal. But we didn't mean to get political, folks. I'm sorry. But if you're a longtime listener to the show, come on, you know where I am on this. Andrew Shanahan, where can people find you if they want to, and I'm sure they do, want to learn more and follow you and keep up with you in your new book?
Sure. So primarily, if you go to a website called Hello Shan, so HELLOSHAN.co.uk, that's my blog, and I am trying to be much more diligent about updating that, more so than my social media feed, so which I will snootily give a miss to here. So have a look at the blog. And if you want to have a look at the book, then you can go to helpbiscuits.com. HELPBISCUITS.com, and that should take you to the Amazon store in your geographic region. And I think it's ludicrously cheap at the moment. I think it's 99p for the ebook, and obviously you can read the sample. And my estimation is that if you read the sample, then you might think this is 99p, not wasted.
I would tend to agree. Andrew Shanahan, you have blessed us all with a wonderful, almost an hour of conversation and insight. And I so thank you for appearing here on Mysterious Goings On.
You're very welcome, Alex. And it wouldn't be English if I didn't finish by apologizing. So
I don't know if I've laughed out loud this much in a little while. Maybe not since election night. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, remember, if you want to find those links, don't worry about scribbling them down. You can find them in the show notes at mgopod.com, where you can also find an archive of literally 5 years worth of interviews and my monologues. And hey, you're going to want to read about my kidney stone adventures, right? I'm having one right now, so be sure to look that one up while you're in there. But again, Andrew Shanahan, writer and advocate for men to get as healthy as they can be. What a tremendous guest. Thanks again. Again, mimgopod.com for all the links, etc., etc. And until next time, keep reading.